Right.
Okay. So these are some photographs of Roma in Slovakia in the town in which I did my research. And I'll let you read these while I talk about the study. This is one part of a larger study that's focused on the systemic and interpersonal context and practices of institutional racism, discrimination, prejudice, and the hope of resistance. I explored this through an examination of laws and policies that affect the educational, social, and economic situations of children from Romani communities and how these policies are experienced at the local school level. And I examined through observation, not in conversation, the ways in which teachers, teacher assistants, students, administrators, activists, government officials, and others work within the structures to maintain or challenge the attitudes and conditions that determine who is seen as worthy of being educated and who is denied meaningful education. Yes, sorry. Okay. All right. So here is this little guy Dalibor. I sat next to him in a classroom, and I had a notebook that the kids would come and write in a first grade classroom, and this little girl kneeled in a seat, and he, wiped it off and said this. It was horrible. So Vladimir Mečiar is a former prime minister of the Slovak Republic, and he termed Roma socially unadaptable and mentally retarded people, and there's more political rhetoric like that.
Speak a little more slowly.
Sorry, I apologize. Okay. So here's the issue, the education of Romani students in Slovakia. Approximately 60% of Roma students are placed in special schools, and that's a low-end estimate. Slovakia has the highest rate of special ed segregation in Central Europe. Second only to the Czech Republic is next. Overrepresentation is analogous to special education in the United States. There's a history of discrimination and prejudice in schools and society at large, as we all know. Compared with Finland, United Kingdom, and Italy, who do not have disability classifications in their special education law or in their education law, they have the lowest rates of segregation and the lowest rates of identification, and the Finland, Czech Republic, and Hungary have the highest rates of segregation of pupils with disabilities, which is what the majority of Romani children are identified as having. So my research questions: how do existing legal frameworks shape educational policies, and what is the relationship between implementation of laws and policies and the equal educational opportunities of Romani children? My theoretical framework is critical race theory that incorporates critiques of liberal meritocratic democracy that essentializes and blames the victim and those who are constructed as unsuccessful in the capitalist market and oppressed by colorblind policies. Central to this maintenance of an artificial order is the concept of other and the role of power and privilege in the construction of the concept of normal, on which the marginalization of specific groups is based. I'm also going to talk about interest convergence in the context of Slovakia's accession to the European Union. This was a qualitative inquiry using critical inquiry using qualitative methods. I spent 15 months, 300 plus hours in first grade classrooms in the Slovak Republic, interviews and document analysis. And I wanted to understand how governments and citizens both construct meanings around race, ethnicity, and participation in democratic institutions, including schools, and how their attitudes are in turn constructed by and with these documents. So I looked at European Union, Council of Europe, European Commission, reports by NGOs, and I interviewed teachers, school administrators, and government officials from the Office of the Plenipotentiary for Roma Affairs and the Ministry of Education. So here are some of the political rhetoric that members of parliament and other government officials say when they talk about Romani children and adults. And one of the members of parliament that talked about how the state should allow a moron to create other morons echoes back to Buck v. Bell in the United States, that essentially perpetuated sterilization in the United States of people with intellectual disabilities. So the European Union essentializes Roma as limiting their contributions to music and dance and the arts, and in ways offers measures, but it does so in a way to continue to make Romani community something apart from other stateless people and something in need of repair from within their own communities. So the preamble of the Slovak Constitution starts with "We the Slovak nation," together with members of national minorities and ethnic groups living on the territory. There's a clear delineation between ethnic Slovaks and other minorities. Hakenos terms this kind of ethnic nation as a folklorist community in which membership is defined by a culture, language, history, and ultimately ethnicity. Nope, do not step on the wires. Okay. All right, so while the preamble guarantees a life of freedom, it also begins to shape racial categories and racial privilege, which in turn affects the access to housing, employment, and educational opportunities for members of ethnic communities. As the Slovak Republic moved toward accession into the EU, the rhetoric changed in the ways that the government talked about Romani communities. The Mečiar government talked about the proposal of activities and measures in order to solve the problems of citizens in need of special care, which was code for Romani. Then the Zorinda government really talked about integration, and now the Rhetoric government talks about the integration and development of the Romani community, and they're using EU funds as with a horizontal priority to target marginalized Roma community settlements. I'll skip all the part about the convergence of interest, but really what happened was in 1998, the only political criteria was language use, in specifically the Hungarian language. And once Roma started emigrating to Western Europe, then suddenly improving the situation of the Roma became a short-term political criterion. So the convergence of interest of, we don't want them, so you have to do something about them so that they don't come to us. And that was one of the conditions for entering the European Union, which Slovakia satisfied. And what happened afterwards is that while citizens from Romani communities are ostensibly afforded the same rights under Slovak, now European Union law as other citizens, it leads to conditions in which socially, politically, and economically they are rendered one down by a racist political and legal system that marginalizes them on an everyday basis. In addition to the decentralization of the governmental structure, local leaders now have to implement the programs and fulfill legislative requirements. And this doesn't happen as the state government lacks the means and the will for comprehensive oversight. There's a disconnect between the policies and laws affecting the educational domains at the state, the nation-state level, and the implementation of these at the local level. In 2004, the Slovak Parliament passed the Equal Treatment Act, and this set out the prohibition of discrimination on any grounds. Section 8 of the law contained a paragraph that described instances in which different treatment is allowed, and promptly Lipschitz took this article to the Constitutional Court, stating that it was that the clause was unconstitutional. And Lipschitz's reasons for this were that the provision was, he said that the provision should be colorblind. He asserted that everyone should be evaluated as an individual and not based on the person's origin or the color of their skin. He contested the positive action clause of the law. In October 2005, the Constitutional Court of the Slovak Republic declared that paragraph 8 was unconstitutional, and in amendments to the law, now the language is temporary compensatory measures for disadvantages arising from age and disability. So that's the only positive action clause allowed in the law. There are specific school policies that also exist, but there are issues with implementation at the local level. There are zero-year classes, which are a mechanism to equalize the educational opportunities for children from Romani communities, and they've been a part of Slovak schools since 1992. These are for students who haven't attained school maturity at the age of compulsory schooling. While the law allows for the establishment of zero-year classes, local control of the administration of funds are affected by attitudes toward Romani communities. One of the villages that I did my research in, there was local buy-in to the value of zero-year classes. However, a larger school in town, 2 teachers proposed that one of the primary schools have a zero-year class, and the director said that he didn't have any money for that small amount of children, even though there are funds available. And I hope someone's keeping track of time, and I'm trying to speak slowly. So there are also, while free primary and secondary schooling is constitutionally guaranteed, there are costs associated with going to school: pencils, notebooks, transportation, and food at the canteen. Along with the zero-year classes, the Slovak government has taken steps to provide material assistance to families living in poverty, code for Romani, to enable students to participate more fully in classes and at least enjoy one hot meal a day. Under Act 544 in 2010, which has incorporated various decrees, each student whose family demonstrates financial need is given a certain amount of funds. A couple of the school directors at my schools really kind of played fast and loose with the funds. I asked how they would be paid to the school canteen, how the funds were divided with transportation, supplies, et cetera. And he's like, oh, no. The funds are to pay for the salary of the teachers for the after-school club, to which really not many children attended. And he said, it's not exactly, it's only a suggestion. So the mechanism is there to provide assistance in schools, but it's up to the school director to determine what happens in his fiefdom. The law also disables students. Students can be identified as disabled and in need of special education services in a variety of ways. Social disadvantage is considered a special needs disabling condition under Slovak education law. It's cross-category C. The child must, one parent receive social benefits, at least one parent is unemployed, at least one parent has attained only primary education, substandard living and hygienic conditions, and the child's home language is not the official language. Another way that a student is placed in special education is they can be sent to a diagnostic center before a placement decision is made. They're typically housed in special education boarding schools. The child resides there for a period of 3 months, but there's really no legislation that determines when the child can be reassessed, so some students are there for the rest of their schooling careers. During the assessment period, the child is learning the reduced curriculum at the special school, potentially exerting a negative impact on the test results in case of reassessment. And also problematic is the absence of legal provisions for reassessment. Thank you. So the conflation of Romani culture and background with disability leads to de facto and sometimes directly de jure segregation, even though the Education Act specifically prohibits all forms of discrimination and segregation in particular. While it is prohibited under Section 228.9 for kindergarten children to be placed in special classes solely because they come from socially disadvantaged backgrounds, this placement often happens. Students enter diagnostic centers and they effectively stay in these segregated boarding schools. No such provision on the prohibition of students from socially disadvantaged backgrounds being placed into primary, secondary schools exists in the Education Act. People are probably going to talk about this later. The Ostrava case in 2007, the European Court of Human Rights determined that it was unlawful discrimination under the European Convention, and there are issues with this in that it applies only to race and ethnicity, and it doesn't assert that all children with disability labels are in fact unlawfully discriminated against by being segregated. And it largely blames the families for agreeing to placement, and there's a minimal critique in the case for the assessment instruments that are used to label and place Romani children in special education, cultural bias, and methodological considerations. And thank you for your time.